In 1927, Fritz Lang released his masterpiece, Metropolis. It came to my attention back in the 90s when Dark City was released, which I'm a huge fan of, back in 1998. When the DVD came out, it actually had a review of Metropolis by H.G. Wells. So first time I'd ever read it, and I've never even really considered, the idea that, Wells and Lang were contemporaries. I don't know which version of the film Mr. Wells saw. As we know, the original film was cut, I know it was 7 reels, down to 10 reels. And what was released in the United States, I believe over in the UK and stuff, were altered versions of it that really didn't make a whole lot of sense. Luckily, we live in an age where coming up 97 years later, you can actually watch nearly the entire film. It makes sense. It's beautiful. I actually first saw the movie when I was around 14 or 15 years old, and George R. Moroder put out a version of it in 1984 that had his own sort of score to it, synth-laden with an orchestra, and it had songs that were conveying the emotion on the screen, like by Loverboy and Freddie Mercury of Queen, Pat Benatar, Bonnie Tyler, and John Anderson of Yes. And that's the first time I saw it. That is the version that was kind of burned in my brain for so long. And I absolutely love Metropolis. I have since seen it a number of times in a number of different styles. One of the things I truly like about the Moroder version, which I wish were in like now the extended or the complete cut that you can get through Kino Lorber, is, because it's considered the complete collection, is instead of place cards of dialogue, they actually took those out. So the only place cards in the film are actually conveying story, they're exposition. They put subtitles, which was wonderful. And they didn't inundate you with subtitles. There are moments where dialogue is definitely being spoken, but you don't really need a place card telling you what they're saying verbatim, because it's conveyed through the scene. I guess this preamble is, I love Metropolis. I love the 1984 version. I love the complete version. I've seen several other versions. I've actually seen a version where there's dialogue. I think it was done in like the 1930s or so, which was kind of cool. They took the silent film and they, added dialogue to it, and it's clunky, but I liked it. I thought it was cool. I think that's something we, need to do now. That'd be fun. And I've seen a beautiful colorized version of it on YouTube. So anyway, we're going to get into Mr. Wells', let's say, not so polite review of Fritz Lang's Metropolis. Here we go. I have recently seen the silliest film. I do not believe it would be possible to make one sillier. And as this film sets out to display the way the world is going, I think my book, The Way the World is Going, may very well concern itself with this film. It is called Metropolis. It comes from the great UFA studios in Germany, and the public is given to understand that it has been produced at enormous cost. It gives in one eddying concentration almost every possible foolishness, cliched, platitude, and muddlement about mechanical progress and progress in general, served up with a sauce of sentimentality that is all its own. It is a German film, and there have been some amazingly good German films before they began to cultivate bad work under cover of a protective quota. And this film has been adapted to the Anglo-Saxon taste, and quite possibly it has suffered in the process. But even when every allowance has been made for that, there remains enough to convince the intelligent observer that most of its silliness must be fundamental. Possibly I dislike this soupy whirlpool nonetheless because I find decaying fragments of my juvenile work of 30 years ago, The Sleeper Awakes, floating about in it. Capex robots have been lifted without apology, and that soulless mechanical monster of Mary Shelley's, who has fathered so many German inventions, breeds once more in this confusion. Originality, there is none. Independent thought, none. Where nobody has imagined for them, the authors have simply fallen back on contemporary things. The aeroplanes that wander above the great city show no advance on contemporary types, though all that stuff could have been livened up immensely with a few helicopters and vertical or unexpected movements. The motor cars are 1926 models or earlier. I do not think there is a single new idea, a single instance of artistic creation or even intelligent anticipation. From the first to last in the whole pretentious stew, I may have missed some point of novelty, but I doubt it. In this, though it must bore the intelligent man in the audience, makes the film all the more convenient as a gauge of the circle of ideas, the mentality from which it has proceeded. The word Metropolis, says the advertisement in English, quote, is in itself symbolic of greatness, unquote, which only shows us how wise it is to consult a dictionary before making assertions about the meaning of words. Probably it was the adapter who made that shot. The German New Babelsberg was better and could have been rendered New Babel. It is a city, we are told, of, quote, about 100 years hence, unquote. It is represented as being enormously high, and all the air and happiness are above, and the workers live as the servile toilers in the blue uniform in The Sleeper Awakes live, down, down, down below. Now, far away in the dear old 1897, it may have been excusable to symbolize social relations in this way, but that was 30 years ago, and a lot of thinking and some experience intervene. That vertical city of the future we know now is, to put it mildly, highly improbable. Even in New York and Chicago, where the pressure on the central sites is exceptionally great, it is only the central office in the entertainment region that soars and excavates. And the same centripetal pressure that leads to the utmost exploitation of site values at the center leads also to the driving out of industrialism and labor from the population center to cheaper areas, and of residential life to more open and airy surroundings. That was all discussed and written about before 1900. Somewhere about 1930, the geniuses of UFA Studios will come up to a book of anticipations which was written more than a quarter of a century ago. The British census returns of 1901 proved clearly that city populations were becoming centrifugal, and every increase in horizontal traffic facilities produced a further distribution. This vertical social stratification is stale old stuff. So far from being 100 years hence, Metropolis, in its forms and shapes, is already, as a possibility, a third of a century out of date. But its form is the least part of its staleness. This great city is supposed to be evoked by a single dominating personality. The English version calls him John Masterman, so that there may be no mistake about his quality. Very unwisely, he has called his son Eric instead of sticking to good hard John, and so relaxed the strain. He works with an inventor, one Rotwang, and they make machines. There are a certain number of other people, and the, quote, sons of the rich, unquote, are seen disporting themselves with underclad ladies in a sort of joy conservatory, rather like the winter garden of an enterprising 1890 hotel during an orgy. The rest of the population is in a state of abject slavery, working in shifts of 10 hours and some mysteriously divided 24 hours, and with no money to spend or property or freedom. The machines make wealth. How is not stated. We are shown rows of motor cars, all exactly alike, but the workers cannot own these, and no sons of the rich would. Even the middle classes nowadays want a car with personality. Probably Masterman makes these cars in endless series to amuse himself. One is asked to believe that these machines are engaged quite furiously in the mass production of nothing that is ever used, and that Masterman grows richer and richer in the process. This is the essential nonsense of it all. Unless the mass of the population has the spending power, there is no possibility of wealth in a mechanical civilization. A vast, penniless slave population may be necessary for wealth where there are no mass production machines, but it is preposterous with mass production machines. You find such a real proletariat in China still. It existed in the great cities of the ancient world, but you do not find it in America, which has gone furthest in the direction of mechanical industry, and there is no grain of reason in supposing it will exist in the future. Masterman's watchword is efficiency, and you are given to understand it is a very dreadful word. And the contrivers of this idiotic spectacle are so hopelessly ignorant of all the work that has been done upon industrial efficiency that they represent him as working his machine minders to the point of exhaustion, so that they faint and machines explode and people are scalded to death. You get machine minders in torment turning levers in response to signals, work that could be done far more effectively by automata. Much stress is laid on the fact that the workers are spiritless, hopeless drudges, working reluctantly and mechanically, but a mechanical civilization has no use for mere drudges. The more efficient its machinery, the less need there is for a quasi-mechanical minder. It is the inefficient factory that needs slaves, the ill-organized mine that kills men. The hopeless drudge stage of human labor lies behind us. With a sort of malignant stupidity, this film contradicts these facts. The current tendency of economic life is to oust the mere drudge altogether, to replace much highly skilled manual work by exquisite machinery and skilled hands, and to increase the relative proportion of semi-skilled, moderately versatile, and fairly comfortable workers. It may indeed create temporary masses of unemployed, and, in The Sleeper Awakes, there was a mass of unemployed people under the hatches. That was written in 1897, when the possibility of restraining the growth of large masses of population had scarcely dawned on the world. It was reasonable then to anticipate an embarrassing underworld of underproductive people. We did not know what to do with the abyss, but there is no excuse for that today. And what this film anticipates is not unemployment, but drudge employment, which is precisely what is passing away. Its fabricators have not even realized that the machine ousts the drudge. Efficiency means large-scale productions, machinery as fully developed as possible, and high wages. The British government delegation sent to study success in America has reported unanimously to that effect. The increasingly efficient industrialism of America has so little need of drudges that it has set up the severest barriers against the flooding of the United States by drudge immigration. Yufa knows nothing of such facts. A young woman appears from nowhere, in particular to help these drudges. She impinges upon Masterman's son Eric, and they go to the catacombs, which, in spite of the gas mains, steam mains, cables, and drainage, have somehow contrived to get over from Rome, skeletons and all, and burrow under this city of Metropolis. She conducts a sort of Christian worship in these unaccountable caverns, and the drudges love and trust her. With a nice sense of fitness, she lights herself about the catacombs with a torch instead of the electric lamps that are now so common. That reversion to torches is quite typical of the spirit of this show. Torches are Christian. We are asked to suppose torches are human. Torches have hearts, but electric hand lamps are wicked, mechanical, heartless things. The bad inventor uses quite a big one. Mary's services are unsectarian, rather like afternoon Sunday school, and in her special catacomb she is not so much an altar as a kind of umbrella stand full of crosses. The leading idea of her religion seems to be a disapproval of machinery and efficiency. She enforces the great moral lesson that the bolder and stouter human effort becomes, the more spiteful heaven grows, by reciting the story of Babel. The story of Babel, as we know, is a lesson against pride. It teaches the human soul to grovel. It inculcates the duty of incompetence. The Tower of Babel was built, it seems, by bald-headed men. I said there was no original touch in the film, but this last seems to be a real invention. You see the bald-headed men building Babel, myriads of them. Why they are bald is inexplicable. It is not even meant to be funny, and it isn't funny. It is just another touch of silliness. The workers in Metropolis are not to rebel or do anything for themselves, she teaches, because they may rely on the vindictiveness of heaven. But Rotvang, the inventor, is making a robot, apparently without any license from Capek, the original patentee. It is to look and work like a human being, but it is to have no soul. It is to be a substitute for drudge labor. Masterman very properly suggests that it should never have a soul, and for the life of me, I cannot see why it should. The whole aim of mechanical civilization is to eliminate the drudge and the drudge soul. But this is evidently regarded as very dreadful and impressive by the producers, who are all on the side of soul and love and such like. I am surprised they do not pine for souls in the alarm clocks and runabouts. Masterman, still unwilling to leave Bad alone, persuades Rotvang to make his robot in the likeness of Mary, so that it may raise an insurrection among the workers to destroy the machines by which they live, and so learn that it is necessary to work. Rather intricate that, but Masterman, you understand, is a rare devil of a man, full of pride and efficiency and modernity, all those horrid things. Then comes the crowning absurdity of the film, the conversion of the robot into the likeness of Mary. Rotvang, you must understand, occupies a small old house embedded in the modern city, richly adorned with pentagrams and other reminders of the antiquated German romances out of which its owner has been taken. A quaint smell of Mephistopheles is perceptible for a time. So even at Ufa, Germany can still be dear old magic-loving Germany. Perhaps Germans will never get right away from the Brocken. Walpurgis Night is the name day of the German poetic imagination, and the national fantasy capers insecurely forever with a broomstick between its legs. By some, no doubt, abominable means, Rotvang has squeezed a vast and well-equipped modern laboratory into this little house. It is ever so much bigger than the house, but no doubt he has fallen back on Einstein and other modern bedevilments. Mary has to be trapped, put into a machine like a translucent cocktail shaker, and undergo all sorts of pyrotechnic treatment in order that her likeness may be transferred to the robot. The possibility of Rotvang just simply making a robot like her evidently never entered the gifted producer's head. The robot is enveloped in wavering halos. The premises seems to be struck by lightning repeatedly. The contents of a number of flasks and carboils are violently agitated, and there are minor explosions and discharges. Rotvang conducts the operations with a manifest lack of assurance, and finally, to his evident relief, the likeness is taken and the thing is calmed down. The false Mary then winks darkly at the audience and sails off to raise the workers, and so forth and so on. There is some rather good swishing about in the water after the best film tradition, some violent and unconvincing machine breaking and rioting and wreckage, and then, rather confusedly, one gathers that Masterman has learnt a lesson and that workers and employers are now to be reconciled by love. Never for a moment does one believe any of this foolish story. For a moment there is anything amusing or convincing in its dreary series of strained events. It is immensely and strangely dull. It is not even to be laughed at. There is not one good-looking, nor sympathetic, nor funny personality in the cast. There is, indeed, no scope at all for looking well or acting like a rational creature amid these mindless, imitative absurdities. The film's air of having something grave and wonderful to say is transparent pretense. It has nothing to do with any social or moral issue before the world, or with any that can ever conceivably arise. It is bunkum and poor and thin, even as bunkum. I am astonished at the toleration shown by quite a number of film critics on both sides of the Atlantic, and it cost, says the London Times, 6 million marks. How they spent all that upon it, I cannot imagine. Most of the effects could have been got with models at no great expense. The pity of it is that this unimaginative, incoherent, cinemalizing, and make-believe film wastes some of its very fine possibilities. My belief in German enterprise has had a shock. I am dismayed by the intellectual laziness it betrays. I thought Germans, even at the worst, could toil. I thought they had resolve to be an industrially modern. It is profoundly interesting to speculate upon the present trend of mechanical inventions and of the reactions of invention upon labor conditions. Instead of plagiarizing from a book 30 years old and resuscitating the banal moralizing of the early Victorian period, it would have been almost as easy, no more costly, and far more interesting to have taken some pains to gather the opinions of a few bright young research students and ambitious modernizing architects and engineers about the trend of modern invention and develop these artistically. Any technical school would have been delighted to supply sketches and suggestions for the aviation and transport of AD 2027. There are now masses of literature upon the organization of labor for efficiency that could have been boiled down at a very small cost. The question of the development of industrial control, the relation of industrial to political direction, the way all that is going, is of the liveliest current interest. Apparently, the people at UFA did not know of these things and did not want to know about them. They were too dense to see how these things could have been brought into touch with the life of today and made interesting to the man on the street. After the worst traditions of the cinema world, monstrously self-satisfied and self-sufficient, convinced of the power of loud advertisement to put things over with the public, and with no fear of searching criticism in their minds, no consciousness of thought and knowledge beyond their ken, they set to work in their huge studio to produce furlong after furlong of this ignorant, old-fashioned balderdash, and ruin the market for any better film along these lines. 6 million marks. The waste of it. The theater, when I visited, was crowded. All but the highest price seats were full, and the gaps in these filled up reluctantly but completely before the great film began. I suppose everyone had come to see what the city of 100 years hence would be like. I suppose there are multitudes of people to be drawn by promising to show them what the city of 100 years hence will be like. It was, I thought, an unresponsive audience, and I heard no comments. I could not tell from their bearing whether they believed that Metropolis was really a possible forecast or no. I do not know whether they thought that the film was hopelessly silly, or the future of mankind hopelessly silly, but it must have been one thing or the other.